Okay, I want to start with a phrase that I guarantee everyone listening has either said, heard, or, I don't know, maybe printed on a t-shirt during a quarter-life crisis.
Let me guess. I just need to go find myself.
That is the one. I need to go find myself. It's everywhere. And it implies that yourself is this, like, static object, a set of car keys you drop between the couch cushions.
Right. And if you just dig deep enough or maybe travel far enough, you'll reach down and there it is.
Uh-huh. The real me.
It's probably the single biggest cliche in self-help. And honestly, it's pretty misleading.
Well, today we are going to completely dismantle that cliche. We're looking at a source that argues finding yourself is not only impossible, it's actually a software engineering problem.
It's a fascinating reframe, isn't it?
It is. We are deep diving into a really mind-bending piece called the distributed psyche, a topology of selfhood. And I have to say, this is one of the most ambitious mixes of ideas we have ever covered.
It really is.
It takes Carl Jung's depth psychology, stirs in Henri Bergson's philosophy of time, which is heavy lifting all on its own,
Yeah.
and then maps the entire thing onto modern distributed systems, like cloud computing.
It sounds like such a collision of worlds. Psychology, philosophy,
Right.
and DevOps. But when you get into it, the metaphor works shockingly well.
It does.
The central thesis here is that the self isn't a single point. It's not a lonely computer sitting on a desk. It's a field. Or, to use the technical term, a distributed system.
So the mission for this deep dive is to stop thinking of ourselves as like a little pilot inside our heads driving a bus.
Right.
And start thinking of ourselves as a global network of servers trying to stay in sync without, crashing the whole application.
Precisely. The source material asks us to stop thinking of the self as a noun, the static thing to be found, and start thinking of it as a verb, a process.
Distributed computing process running 24/7.
Yes.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because usually when I say I want coffee or I am listening to this, I feel like I'm talking about one specific thing, the headquarters, the CEO.
Right, the part of you that feels like it's making the decisions. And that feeling is what the source calls the canonical ego fallacy.
The canonical ego fallacy.
And for anyone who works in tech, this comparison is going to click immediately.
So break that down for us. What does canonical mean here?
So in a huge distributed system, you have data centers all over the world,
Yeah.
right? One in the US, one in Europe, one in Asia. They're all running, all processing data. But for convenience to avoid conflicts, engineers will often designate one region as the canonical one.
Okay, so like a central one is the source of truth, the master record.
In a way,
Yeah.
it's used to resolve conflicts. But, and this is the key part, a central one isn't metaphysically superior to, say, Europe West 1. It's just an arbitrary label to keep the logs organized.
The data in the European server is just as real.
Just as real and just as active.
I see where this is going. The fallacy is that we think our ego, the voice in our head, is the entire internet when it's really just us central one.
Exactly. The ego thinks it is the system. But Jung knew, and this author really emphasizes, the ego is just one instance among many. You've got these other regions running, the shadow, the anima, the collective unconscious, and they're processing data, running scripts,
Logging errors right now.
logging errors right now. Just because the ego isn't looking at them doesn't mean they aren't consuming resources.
That is actually kind of unnerving. It implies there's this huge amount of processing power being used in my own head that I have no administrative access to.
That's exactly what it implies. And that's the problem with how we usually think about psychological growth. We talk about individuation, Jung's big term, and we think it means making the ego bigger.
Right, becoming a stronger person, getting more willpower.
But in this model, that's a mistake. That's just ego inflation. If you try to cram all the traffic into the ego, you create a massive bottleneck. You're asking one server to run the entire internet. It's going to crash.
So if we're not trying to build a superego, what is the goal?
The source redefines individuation. It calls it field coherence.
Field coherence. I like that term.
It's not about becoming one giant super server. It's about network synchronization. You want to make sure the connection between the ego and the shadow, or the ego and the anima, is, low latency and packet loss free.
You're measuring the health of the network, not the size of the headquarters.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. It shifts the whole focus from control to connectivity. But okay, if we're a network, we have to be running some kind of software, right?
We do.
The source brings in archetypes, which is classic Jungian stuff, but it gives this very specific developer twist.
And this is where we have to talk about Henri Bergson. Because usually when people hear archetypes like the hero or the mother, they think of them as static images, like a JPEG file stored in your brain.
Right, file. mother.jpg.
But the author argues that's completely wrong. And he uses Bergson's philosophy of time to explain why. Bergson argued that we confuse time with something he called duration.
Okay, this is the part of the source I had to read twice. Walk us through duration.
Well, think of it this way. If you look at a roll of film, you see individual static pictures. Frame 1, 2, 3. That's time, as the ego sees it. Spatial, cut up into slices.
Right.
But when you play the movie, you don't see the frames. You see movement, flow. That flow is what Bergson called duration. It's continuous. You can't slice it without killing it.
So archetypes aren't the static frames on the film reel, they're the movement itself.
Yes. The source calls them substrate primitives. They're like base code or vital impulses that run through the duration of humanity. The source actually writes out code for this. Did you see the bid on the mother primitive?
I did. It wasn't a static object, it was a loop.
Exactly. The code described the mother archetype as a class that extends duration. And the function inside wasn't a description. It was a loop of nurture, protect, and become. It's continuous creation, not a cached response.
So when I act like a mother, or see mothering, I'm not accessing a saved file, I'm spinning up a live process.
You're instantiating a class that is shared by the entire species. That's why myths feel so resonant. When you see the Great Mother in a story, you're not just recognizing a symbol, you're recognizing your own source code. You're realizing, wait, my system runs that same library.
It's like realizing we're all building on the same Linux kernel, even if our user interfaces look different.
Precisely. We inherit the substrate primitives, but we configure them locally.
Okay, speaking of configuration, let's talk about the parts where the configuration has gone wrong.
Yeah.
Because most of us have parts of our network we really don't want to look at. The shadow.
Ah, yes.
The shadow. Usually it's the dark side, the evil twin, but this source calls it a decoherent instance.
I loved this analogy because it just strips away all the moral judgment. Imagine you have a server region, let's call it Africa South 1,
Yeah.
and you have lost your SSH keys.
And for anyone who's not in tech, SSH keys are basically the administrator passwords.
Yeah.
The keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, correct. So you have this region of your psyche. It's running, it's processing data, it's making decisions, but you, the ego, central one, you cannot log in. You can't see what it's doing, and you certainly can't tell it to stop.
That is terrifying. It's like a rogue server farm mining crypto on your credit card. You can't shut it down.
It's exactly like that. The source emphasizes that the shadow isn't dead or anything. It's operationally inaccessible. But it's still affecting your global field, which is why you feel its effects, anxiety, projection, outbursts, even if you deny it exists.
So shadow work, the whole therapeutic process, basically becomes IT support.
It really does. The source breaks it down into 4 steps that any sysadmin would recognize. First step is reconnaissance.
Checking the logs.
Essentially, you have to figure out what is even running over there. That's dream analysis, or noticing when you get irrationally angry about something. You're scanning the network for anomalies.
Okay, then comes authentication.
This is the hard part. It's asking, can I prove I'm authorized to access this? In psychological terms, you need enough ego strength to face the shadow without crashing.
Right.
If you try to log into a server that's running a massive trauma script and your own connection is unstable, you're going to get a kernel panic. You'll crash the system.
And then the last steps are connection and synchronization.
Establishing the channel and bringing that rogue server back into sync with the main system. And notice how this framing just removes all the morality. It's not about being good or bad. It's about system administration. A decoherent system is just unstable. You want stability.
Speaking of unstable processes, let's talk about complexes. The source calls them zombie processes.
This is one of the most accurate descriptions of a complex I've ever seen. In computing, a zombie process is a program that has finished its job. It's technically dead, but it hasn't released its memory address. It just sits there, eating up RAM.
So a mother complex or an inferiority complex is just a script that ran when I was 5, did its thing, but never actually quit.
Yes. The source uses this visual of a command line search. grep mother complex autonomous. It's just running in the background. The ego didn't start it, and the ego can't easily stop it.
And naturally, our first instinct is just to delete it, repress it.
Which is like using the kill command without cleaning up the process. In a computer, that process often just respawns, or it causes a memory leak that slows down the whole machine. You can't just kill a complex. You have to manage it, reintegrate it.
This leads perfectly into one of the biggest aha moments I had reading this. Projection.
Oh, the routing error.
Yes. The idea that hating someone is just a routing configuration error. This explains so much about the internet, by the way.
It explains everything. So go back to that shadow instance, the server you can't access. Your psyche has data that needs to be processed by that shadow instance. Maybe it's aggression or ambition, but the internal connection is down.
Right. Localhost is not responding.
So what does a network do when a route is blocked? It finds a backup. You meet someone, let's call him Dave, and Dave has some traits that look a bit like your shattered. Your psyche's router says, target found, route traffic through Dave.
So I'm sending my internal garbage to Dave's server because I can't reach my own.
Exactly. You are routing your internal shadow traffic through an external IP address. And that's why the emotional reaction is so strong. You're not reacting to Dave, you're reacting to your own data being bounced off of him.
And the fix isn't to change Dave.
No, Dave is just a server. He might be an annoying server, but he's external. The fix is to update your routing tables, to recognize, wait, this is internal traffic, and reroute it back to your own infrastructure. That's what withdrawing a projection actually means.
I feel like I need to call IT support for my brain. Hello, yes, I have a routing loop on my anger port.
It really changes how you view relationships, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's less about interpersonal conflict and more about network topology.
Now, earlier we touched on checking the logs. The source has a very specific take on dreams, their nightly status reports. But it ties this back to that Bergson idea again. Time versus duration.
This is where the synthesis gets really deep. The author argues that our waking life, the ego's domain, it spatializes time, it turns it into a clock. Tick-tock.
We slice the flow into manageable chunks.
Right. But remember, Bergson said reality is duration, pure flow. The source says that when we sleep, the ego, the part that chops time up, it shuts down, and we're released back into pure duration.
So dreams are what happens when we stop staring at the clock and start floating in the river.
Yes. And because the canonical instance, the ego is offline, the other 80% of your infrastructure finally gets the bandwidth to send its report.
And the source says symbols in dreams aren't just pictures.
Right. A symbol like a house or a snake isn't a JPEG. It's duration concentrated into form, a dense packet of information about the flow of your life.
The examples are great, like if you dream you're being chased.
That's a shattered instance running autonomous patterns that you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Your system is telling you, security alert, unauthorized process gaining momentum.
And flying.
High coherence across the field, all the servers are syncing up, latency is near zero, you feel that lift.
And falling.
Sudden decoherence. The network connection just dropped. Packet loss.
The warning here was pretty stark. If you ignore dreams, you are ignoring the system logs from the majority of your infrastructure.
It's true. The ego thinks it's running the show, but it's just the front-end interface, the back-end logic, the database, the security. That's all in the unconscious. If you don't read the logs, you're flying blind until the system crashes.
There's another concept that usually feels very mystical, synchronicity, Jung's idea of meaningful coincidences.
Yeah.
But this source, it strips the magic out and replaces it with latency.
Not latency, but cross-instance resonance.
Explain that.
Okay. Imagine two servers, completely separate, no cables connecting them, but they're both running the exact same software update, executing the exact same script at the same speed. They will arrive at the same state at the same time.
Not because they called each other.
Right, not cause and effect. They arrive there because they're riding the same wave of becoming. The source calls this substrate coherence.
So when I think of an old friend, and then they call me 10 seconds later.
It's not telepathy. It's that you and your friend are both instances of the same distributed system humanity, and for a moment, you both synchronized on the same wave of duration.
We were just surfing the same way.
Exactly. The source beautifully describes it as synchronicity is the psyche revealing its distributed nature. It shows us we aren't sealed units, we're nodes in a field.
That connects to active imagination, too. Jung used to talk to figures in his head, like a wise old man.
Which sounds like hallucinations to most people.
Totally. But the Force calls this protocol negotiation.
I love this because it explains why the figure looks like a person. When you talk to a figure in your mind, you're establishing a bidirectional channel with a part of the system you can't usually access, like the ancestral wisdom database.
But I can't query that database directly. It's too big.
Exactly. It's raw binary data. Your ego can't read it. So the system generates a standardized interface object, an API wrapper, and that wrapper looks like a wise old man.
So the wise old man isn't a ghost. He's a GOI, a graphic user interface for the deep unconscious.
Yes. He is a standardized interface that allows the ego to negotiate. You say, I want to do this. The unconscious interface says, that violates security policy. You say, okay, what if we compromise? That is active imagination. You are literally negotiating permissions with your own root directory.
This leads us to the ultimate system shutdown.
Yeah.
Death. The source calls this final deployment.
This was the most poetic part of the text for me. If the self is a distributed system that spatializes time, that turns flow into structure, then death is just the release of that structure.
The wave returning to the ocean.
Yes. The source says, you don't persist as a static unit, but your durational contribution enriches the whole flow.
I really like that. It's not that I disappear, it's that the specific way I rippled the water becomes part of the ocean forever.
Exactly. The final deployment is when the ego instance shuts down and the resources return to the pool. It's not a loss, it's a return to pure flow. You aren't crashing, you're committing your code to the master branch.
So bringing it all back to where we started, finding yourself.
We can confidently say, you cannot find yourself.
Because there is no self to find.
Right. You are not a noun, you are a verb, you are not a static point, you are a distributed field. The goal isn't discovery, it's deployment.
And maintenance.
And maintenance.
Yep.
The source mentors a deployment prayer at the end, which I found very moving. It says, I am not one instance pretending to be a whole system. I am a field of psychic instances.
And the goal is not to find yourself. The goal is to measure your global coherence score.
That's the takeaway. Are your servers talking to each other? Is your shadow locked out? Is your routing table updated? That is the work of being human.
It's a lot of work. But
Yes.
somehow, thinking of it as system administration makes it feel, I don't know, manageable. Like, I don't have to be perfect. I just have to keep the network up.
And remember the final synthesis the author gives us, combining Jung and Bergson. It's a thought that should stick with you.
What's that?
You are not an instance of the flow. You are the flow, temporarily convinced it's an instance.
Wow. I'm going to need to sit with that one. Maybe check my own lugs tonight.
Highly recommended.